How do professional photographers take an image like this and turn it into this? Don't worry, I'm going to show you exactly how to do this with your images. If you take a closer look at the before image that I just showed you, you can see that it was a very overcast day, and this image started off very flat and kind of boring. This is actually a very common and fundamental problem that photographers deal with all the time. But why is that? That's because our eyes see things in 3 dimensions, but our cameras take pictures in 2 dimensions. Add to that the fact that if we're editing our images, most of us are shooting in RAW, which can make your images look even more flat. Now, that's actually a good thing because it allows you to capture more dynamic range, minimize the too dark shadows, and avoid blown out highlights. But it can also remove that feeling of depth in an image, even if it's not taken on an overcast day. So we have to fix that in post-processing. And I'm going to show you the right way to do it. But a lot of people will just look at a flat image and say, well, it needs more contrast, and crank up that contrast slider. The result is a crappy looking image because all you're doing is making the shadows darker and the highlights brighter. Adjustments like clarity and texture are a little less harsh, and the tone curve gives you a little more control over which tonal values are changed, but there's still global adjustments. So while the image will have more overall contrast, you're still not solving the problem of an image that lacks depth. You want to add contrast to your image in a way that makes it look more realistic and less two-dimensional. To do that, you need to edit different parts of the image differently. Let me show you with a real simple example. This is a circle, of course. It's clearly a two-dimensional image. You can tell that it's flat. There's nothing about this image that looks three-dimensional. But you can take that same image and add some shading to it, and you have this. Now, this is still a two-dimensional image. You're still looking at the same flat screen in front of you. But with just some shading of certain areas in a certain way, we've created this look of depth in the circle and turned it into a sphere. That's because three-dimensional objects react to light in a certain way. Let's take this camera lens. As I move it in relationship to the light pattern on the lens changes. The objects around you every day are being lit with directional light. So as those objects' relationship to the light source changes, you'll see that light pattern change. And that is a major indicator that tells our brain that that object is three-dimensional because of the way the directional light reacts off of the object. So when we look at that first circle that's just flatly white, we automatically know that it's a two-dimensional object. But as soon as we do something to add an indicator of directionality of light, that's shading, our mind processes this as something that we see in the real world, as a three-dimensional image, even though it's on a two-dimensional screen. So this concept of directional light creating depth is something that we can use when we're post-processing our images to create more depth in those images. And I'm going to show you how that works in an actual photo in just a minute, but first I want to give you a little different demonstration. This sphere still looks three-dimensional, but we're also using color contrast as well as brightness and shading to create this three-dimensional look. Using color like this is another way that we can represent depth in our images. Taking it back to the real world, something that is being lit by the sun during golden hour, for example, is going to have an orangey yellow hue to the bright sunny side, and the darker shadow area is going to look very blue in contrast. So how do we apply this to our images? Well, there's 2 things you have to figure out before you use this to edit your photo. The first is the direction of light. Where is the light coming from? Once you know this, once you know where the light is coming from in the image, you know what elements in that image have sunny sides or bright sides and shadowy sides, and you can apply that when you're editing the photo. So what if you can't tell? Sometimes when it's an overcast day or some other circumstances, you might not actually be able to see a direction of light in your image. So the purists are going to be mad at me for this one, but here's my advice. Make one up. If it's an outdoor photo, you can use an app to see where the sun actually was that day and be a little more accurate when you make up your light direction. But whatever your approach is, pick a direction of light and stick to it. You don't want to edit your photo looking like it has 2 suns. Second, I want you to think about the color of light. What color should the highlights be? What color should the shadows be? Maybe they already are like that in your image and all you need to do is accentuate that. or you may need to kind of add that to your image. I use orange for highlights and blue for shadows pretty often for landscapes shot at golden hour, but there are situations where the colors can be different. So when you put those two things together, you have a really good idea of where to brighten and darken your image. We call that dodging and burning, and where to add some color contrast in your image to create a lot more depth and dimension in your photo. Now let's look at an actual photo to demonstrate what I'm talking about. The sunset here wasn't as great as I had hoped it would be that day, so I started out with this kind of boring and flat image, but after applying the things we just talked about, I came up with this just by editing it in Lightroom. To start off, I added a little contrast only to the sky area and darkened the top and bottom to frame the image a little bit. Then I added some color to the sunset itself to enhance the golden hour look. I actually took the color of the sunset and just added more to it. And I also brightened that area as well. But more importantly, I made sure that the effect of the sunset was shown in the rest of the image, in the elements in the image. So I added a little bit of that orange tint and brightness to this side of the building and made sure that the shadow side was a little darker and bluer. So I created the same effect that we saw in that sphere. We have a bright side transitioning into the darker side with a little bit of added color contrast as well. By creating a much more directional quality to the light, there's more depth in the image and it looks more three-dimensional. You can apply this to any image, even portraits. But if you want my help to fully implement these concepts in your photos and learn exactly how I do this in Lightroom, then I want you to check out my painting with light and color training. All you have to do is click in the link in the description below to learn more about it. I named it that because painting with light and color is exactly how you can add more depth and dimension to your images and give them that 3D quality. I'll show you how to take a dull, flat image and make it more exciting, and take good images and make them great. So make sure you click that link below so you can start painting with light and color today.